My view is that women also need to hold their full power and their full resources. There's a focus right now on a certain amount of these tech bros. But the truth is, two-thirds of the wealth held in my country is now in the hands of women.
The book is The Next Day, and you're the same age as me. We're 60. We were 60 last summer. And as you say in the book, all of us have lost something precious on the way here. And it's undeniable that. So
Mm.
I completely understand it. What do you think you've lost, or who have you lost?
Well, I think, I talk about in the book, one of the chapters I dedicate to my very good friend in my 30s at Microsoft, John Nielsen. And he passed away in his mid to late 30s, leaving behind his wife, who I'm still very, very good friends with. We walk together every Monday, and three young children at the time. And so, to lose a friend at that young age, that was really life altering for me. It really had got me thinking about end of life and how do I want to live my life? Because you just don't know how much time you have.
No, and there's a lot of negative emphasis on aging, but actually, I'm really glad you make the point in the book that it is, for all its stresses and strains, this is a privilege, isn't it?
Absolutely. To be 60 and to be alive and to be vibrant and to be healthy. Aging's kind of a funny word. I almost think it's really just another word for living. We're living, and I'm thrilled to be living in this day and age at age 60.
Yeah. And what do you prioritize now in your life? What are your main priorities?
Well, I prioritize for sure my family, my extended family. My parents are still alive. They're in their mid 80s. I have two young granddaughters, my children who are all young adults in their 20s. I certainly prioritize that. I prioritize time for good friends because that is just precious to me as well. And then I prioritize time for work because my work helps give my life meaning. And I feel like there's something I can do with the unbelievable resources that I'm privileged enough to have.
Yes, and your new organization is called Pivotal. And the standout sentence regarding Pivotal is, I'm simply not willing to accept the idea that my granddaughters could grow up with less freedom than I had. These are troubling times in the United States, aren't they?
There are troubling times around the world, definitely.
Yes, but I mean, listen, Britain's not perfect, but I think I'm probably happier as a woman and as a mother of daughters living in the UK.
Well, and part of the reason that I wrote that statement is that because of the decision that was made by our Supreme Court, as it stands today, my two granddaughters will have less rights than I had growing up. And that to me makes absolutely no sense. And so one of the things that I'm doing is making sure that my work continues and that we really keep working on lifting women up in the United States and around the world.
Can you just give us some practical examples of the work that Pivotal is doing right now?
Sure. When I left the Gates Foundation in June of last year, I made a $1 billion commitment through my company, Pivotal Ventures. And that $1 billion commitment is really to help make sure that women can step into their full power. A piece of it, a quarter of it, 250 million, is going towards a women's health fund. It's called Action for Women's Health. We've called for proposals from around the world. We're now vetting those proposals in October. We will award those to winners. That's one example. Another big chunk of the money goes towards women's organizations in the United States that have been playing defense for too long and need to have the funding to play on the offense. So we keep working on women's rights. So those are two of the big areas amongst others.
So you're thinking long term because Donald Trump, he will go. I mean, he can't be there forever. In 4 years' time, the Trump administration might be a distant dream. Do you think it will be?
Well, it's no surprise that I was disappointed by this election, and we do have a constitution in place, so he will not be there again in 4 years. And so, absolutely, we need to be making long-term investments on behalf of women and girls because we are half of society. And when we reach the right places, our rightful places in society, for instance, in state legislatures or on Capitol Hill, we do make different policies and laws for society, and we move money differently. Not better or worse necessarily, just differently because of our lens on society.
And to what degree are you really irked by this current emphasis on, well, I think the expression is masculine energy? What does that mean to you?
Well, I never like anything that pits men against women or women against men. I just don't believe in it. I know too many good men and women in our country and around the world who want the best for their kids, their daughters, their sons. Everybody dreams of a better life for their child. That's universal. I know that from the many, many, many years I've traveled around the world on behalf of the Gates Foundation. So I don't think we should ever pit men against women.
No, but you know what I'm getting at. The tech bro emphasis on the hoodie wearing guys in the room. It must be something that you've got a view on.
Well, I certainly have a view on it. And my view is that shouldn't be. My view is that women also need to hold their full power and their full resources. There's a focus right now on a certain amount of these tech bros. But the truth is, two-thirds of the wealth held in my country is now in the hands of women. And that's only going to continue to grow because, we're living longer. Women are outliving men in our country. So making sure those women can step into their full power, their full voice, decision-making authority, and resources, that's what's going to change society.
Can we talk about your family life? Because your dad worked on the Apollo mission, didn't he? So a formidable engineer, clearly a brilliant man. And your mother, very clever, but didn't work outside the home. What was that dynamic like?
Yes. So when I was a young child, it is true my mom didn't work outside the home when I was very young. But by the time I was in late middle school, my parents, so my dad's engineer's salary, he worked on the Apollo missions. It was incredible. So I saw, amazing innovation as a girl growing up. As I talk about in the book, he really believed that my sister and I, if we wanted to, could be good in math and science. And he supported us in that, which was really something. My mom also believed we should all go to college, but it was clear my dad's engineering salary wasn't going to put four children through college. There were four of us. I have three siblings. And so my parents started a small real estate business that those rental properties and houses that they fixed up and sold and that we worked on as a family was going to be our college fund. So my mom, starting in my late middle school years, also worked outside of the home in that regard. So I saw her more on that sort of entrepreneurial bent with my dad. So I ended up having both in my house, which was lovely.
I mean, you had a brilliant job at Microsoft, and then you did leave it when your first daughter was born. And I confess I was a bit surprised when I read that in the book. Was that something you wrestled with, or was it something you actually thought was a no brainer?
I knew when I quit that I would always go back to work in some capacity. I didn't know in what capacity, but I did feel that my circumstances were unusual. We were an extraordinarily privileged family, and yet I wanted my three children to grow up with the values I had from my middle class family growing up. I also, my ex-husband, Bill, he was a hard charging CEO. We were at the computer industry was on its way up. He's traveling the globe for that. So if we wanted our children to be raised with the values we wanted to have as a family, I just felt somebody needed to be home. But I did know I would go back to work. That I
Yeah.
knew. I just didn't know how and in what way.
Right. I mean, I love your honesty in the book. I mean, you do say that in that pregnancy, you gained now 79 pounds in weight. Um,
Yes.
that is quite a lot.
My
Um,
doctor didn't think it was so funny, but I did.
no, you obviously enjoyed yourself, and that's no bad thing. Bill did go to the birth, but you do say that he smelt faintly of burgers, and you found that very nauseating.
Yeah, I wrote that in the book because, look, it was a different era. Dads, I think were in the delivery room, but, I even write in the book that for the first pregnancy, like it was clear my labor was going to be very long. So he went off to work for a while and then showed up. And I wouldn't say it was a faint smell of burgers. As you know, if you've had children, your senses are very heightened in the delivery room. So it probably was a faint smell, but it felt huge to me. So I did
Right.
ask him to take his that particular sweater off and put it in the hallway.
Right. You also acknowledge that actually motherhood, becoming a mother, is utterly overwhelming. And I love the notion that on the way back from the maternity hospital, you decided you would not only stop at a Starbucks, but you would stagger across the concourse, whatever it was, and you would order your own coffee because you believed that would help you reclaim your old life. But the truth is, you can't reclaim it, can you? It's gone.
Yeah, it was a little bit of an illusion, I would say, but it was a stance I sort of made to myself, stitches and all, and I had several. I was going to shuffle through that parking lot and get that coffee, but I think it really hit me the first time I wanted to leave the house, and I realized, oh my gosh, that baby will always be with me when I leave the house, at least for the next, year. Eventually I had more help, but it was like, wow, it took me a lot longer to get out the house. And I had a jogging stroller so I could, push her around the neighborhood, first walking, then jogging. But yeah, I felt it was important to still have some semblance of independence of my own because I was leaving a big career and excited to be a new mom, but wow, a new baby, they cry a lot.
Yeah, well, and you also had an earthquake to deal with. Just tell us about that.
Yes, I write about in the book that, I was still recovering from the birth. I was just a few days later. My mom was helping me that first week, and all of a sudden there was an earthquake in Seattle, which I'd never been through one, and this was felt like quite a big one, at least to me at the time. And I was on the bed, and I leapt up out of the bed and ran to the top of the stairs, shouting at my mother, cover the baby," because she was downstairs. Now, of course, she knew what to do, but I realized in that moment, that visceral moment, oh my gosh, am I attached to this child? Like you'd give up your own life for your child, and it hit me, I would say, almost like a ton of bricks.
And do you think we actually are as honest as we should be about that overwhelming sense of responsibility that does hit you like a 10-ton truck?
Well, I think it's different in different societies how we are dealing with that. I think it's important, though, for young moms and dads to know that, look, it's a really special time when you have a newborn, but you are sleepless, you are tired. A young woman who's having a baby, or even an older woman, her body doesn't feel like her own at first. So I think we do need to show that side of it, that it's hard. It can be both beautiful, but it's also very hard, especially the first few months.
And at that time, did you feel resentment towards Bill because his life was obviously able to continue in a, presumably, it was the life he'd always led?
Um, I wouldn't say that, certainly not on the weekdays, but if he chose to do something on the weekends that I felt like was something I couldn't necessarily do, or it went a lot longer than he expected it to, then I would get upset about that for sure. And we had to work that through, which I think many couples do.
Yeah. I mean, the book, we need to emphasize the book includes your feelings around your divorce, but it's not only about your divorce from Bill Gates. So we need to make that very, very clear. But I think you are interesting on, I don't know, the compartmentalization that a lot of people do, certainly not just women, when they're in a long term relationship. And there's a part of them that knows this isn't quite right, but they don't allow it to impact them, or they feel it's just not the right time to do anything. Was it like that for you?
Well, my book, as you said, is about many transitions because we go through many transitions in life. I felt it was important to write about my divorce just because people knew I'd been through it. And many people, unfortunately, do go through a divorce, about 50% of couples. Um, I can only say what my journey was, and I talk about in that chapter needing to listen to my inner voice. Sometimes you've got this inner voice that's small and it's there, but I do think paying attention to it is the advice I would say to people in any situation. It's quite important.
You are privileged in many ways, and you always acknowledge, by the way, how privileged you are and have been. But you have lots of famous friends. Oprah is one of them, and
Mm.
Oprah, I think, used the expression, "What is whispering to you?" Can you just tell us about that and about the weight of that question?
Mm. Yes. So yeah, first of all, I'm unbelievably privileged. And to both with the resources I have, but the people I've been gotten to know over time. I was interviewing her last year for a series I was doing called Moments That Make Us. And she said this expression, which I then put in the book. She gave me permission, which was to say, your voice has this small whisper, and if you don't pay attention to it, it's eventually, as she says, going to thump you on the head. So if you can catch the voice, as she says, in the whisper, you can start to deal with it and listen to what it's telling you. And I think we all need to create space in our lives to listen to that inner voice, whether it's quiet time in the morning, whether it's a walk, whether it's a jog, whether it's sitting out in nature. There are many ways to do it, but our voices and even our bodies are giving us messages all the time, and if we push them aside, they can become big problems later.
Yeah. You did in the well, during the course of the divorce, have therapy, didn't you? But I don't think therapy was something that you were really keen to rush into. I think that would be an understatement. Did you feel resistant towards the whole notion of it?
Definitely. And I write about therapy in the book, and I also write about anxiety that I had, and even a panic attack, which I'd never had in my life. And the reason I thought it was important to write about those things is I think we're all better off when we can acknowledge these things in our life, even the resistance I had to it. I think for me, some of that was because I grew up Catholic, some of it was because I grew up in Texas. Um, I really don't think I knew anybody who'd been to therapy until I moved to the West Coast.
Is
But look,
it really, sorry to interrupt, but is it really that stark, the difference that people.
at least when I was growing up, but
Right.
generationally, things have changed immensely. So many young people now talk about their anxiety or needing to find a therapist if they can, or getting some help. So I think it was also partly a generational thing.
And I think a lot of people, but I'm going to say overwhelmingly women, who read the book will take comfort from the fact that you're prepared to say you had anxiety ridden dreams in the build up to the divorce, that you were really, really, well, hard on yourself and desperately concerned about what the negotiations were going to be like, because you knew Bill, obviously, well, you knew him, but you also knew his incredible intellectual capabilities. I mean, the pressure on you was considerable, wasn't it?
And I wrote about that from my experience because I think the pressure, honestly, no matter what level you're at, on any family going through that is intense. You're pulling apart something that has been put together. And hopefully, you have interwoven your lives and your finances and your goals. And so, anytime you're pulling it apart, at least all the divorces I've seen up close, they are just painful. And I thought it was important to be authentic about that.
Yeah, and I've been divorced myself, I should say, and there is a peculiar intimacy about that process in a funny way. You are thrown together with the man, in this case, and in my case, and you're having these quite in depth and emotional conversations, and it really does get you. I mean, it's something that's quite hard to get over. Do you think you're over it now?
I think I'm living the life I want to live now, and I am very happy. And one of the things I talk about in the book is also you learn to lean on other people. I had to really lean on my friends in a way I never had before. And guess what? There's beauty in that too, and you grow from it, and then you find a resilience in you.
Yeah, these are the friends you call, I think, the lunch bunch. Is that right?
I had that group of friends for quite some time, but I have two spiritual groups and I have a walking group that I call my Truth Council. And we walk every Monday morning that we're in town.
Right, and that's just a fixed point in your week. Nothing can change that.
That's right.
Right, okay. How far do you walk?
Depends on It depends on, given our age, what any of us are dealing with health-wise, if somebody's got a twisted ankle or if we're all having a good morning. So, we like to walk about 5.5 miles, but we don't always do that. I will have to admit, even once this year, we only walked about a mile to a bakery and a mile back. We're like, we need our coffee this morning.
Okay, that's my kind of long walk. I think that sounds brilliant. Can I ask, have you read Sarah Wynne Williams' book, Careless People?
I have not.
What, why not?
I don't know. I just haven't picked it up. Hasn't come across my purview.
Okay, I mean it's the book that is she's a whistleblower, worked for Facebook, and I was about the only reason she's cropped up in my head is that obviously it's not unconnected to your world, but I was meant to be interviewing her, and now Meta have stopped her doing interviews to publicise this book. Should we be concerned about this, that this woman is no longer free to talk about the book she's written? And I appreciate that she hasn't worked at Facebook for quite some time, but nevertheless, shouldn't she be allowed to tell her version of events?
Well, I'm not going to speak to her particular case, but what I will say is that I believe a woman should have their full voice, decision-making authority, and resources to use in society. So I never like when you see a woman silenced.
And do you think it's rather frightening that she has been?
I think it's concerning.
Should parents be asking more questions about social media and particularly about their children's use of it?
Definitely. Definitely. I raised three children who are now grown adults, and I will tell you the difference between when my oldest was in middle school and I was negotiating a flip phone in fifth grade with her versus my youngest when went through middle school during the time of a smartphone. It was profoundly different. And so I'm a big proponent on having rules and limits on phones about when kids are in their bedrooms with them. I made sure all my kids put their phones outside their bedrooms where I knew where they were plugged in at night, and they will tell you I checked. I believe that, kids really shouldn't have a phone in their hands at certain ages, and they ought to be even in high school, even in school, they shouldn't be in the classroom. I've seen great classrooms where everybody checks their phone into a cubby on the way in the classroom door and they pick it up on the way out. These are easy things, rules and to follow, that I think just give all of these kids a break and let them focus on other things.
Yeah, I mean, it is notable in Careless People that Sarah says that the bosses at Facebook really were very strict with their own children. I mean, they really had very strict rules and indeed would prioritize education at a school that was Montessori based and incredibly simple, and gadgets were just banned at home. I mean, that does tell you quite a lot, doesn't it?
There was a movie out in the United States, actually a documentary about 4 years ago, with several people interviewed in the tech industry who were actually have changed their mind, and now that they have kids, are proponents of not having social media in their hands at a young age. And you're finally seeing the previous Surgeon General in the last administration, Vivek Murthy, who was great. He really went out and was really letting people know the devastating effects of what's happening in suicide rates and anxiety because of social media and phones. So I do think the tide is finally turning, um, and I think that's needed.
What do you make of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s stance on vaccines? Because you and Bill poured billions into vaccines. And during COVID, I mean, preposterously, there was utter rubbish about Bill planting chips in people's heads. And yet here we are. That man is now in charge of health in the Trump administration. What do you say about it?
What I know about vaccines is that they absolutely save children's lives. And I have met literally thousands of parents in low income countries who walk miles in the heat. They leave their small business, they leave their farm, they figure out how to get the bus fare. And when you talk to them and they're in line to get those vaccines and you ask them why, they look at you like, why are you even asking me the question? Of course, this is going to save my child's life. I want the best for my child. So it makes no sense to me that we would roll back any vaccinations in those parts of the world or anywhere. All three of my children are fully vaccinated, as are my granddaughters, because guess what? I want them to live and their parents want them to live and to grow up healthy. Why have a needless disease that could cause you to land in the hospital or even die? It just makes no sense.
So we're speaking in the week of the Signal chat group leak. And people in the UK will have listened to you, Melinda, and many of them will be thinking, why is this woman not going into politics? So, well, perhaps you are. Is there an answer to that? Would you consider it?
I will not go into politics. But what I will do is make sure that we get far more women into state legislatures in the United States, because we move a lot of policy and a lot of money through state legislatures. And it's a great training ground so that we get more women up on Capitol Hill in DC, in our Senate and our US House, because women make different policy than men. It's not that they have that they're better or worse. They just have a different lens on society. And that's why I believe we need far more women in our parliaments and in our legislatures.
So, is that, I mean, I was going to ask whether you have an ambition for the next 30 years, but is that it? Just to prioritize getting women further and higher in the US? And do you think you'll live to see a female US president?
I certainly hope I live to see a US female president. I also hope to live a long time, so I think those two can cross one another. My initiatives really are about lifting up women everywhere. So whether that's I made $1 billion commitment last year when I left the foundation through my company Pivotal Ventures to lifting up women across the world. So 250 million of it is really for Women's Health Action Fund, around women's health. We need to do more basic science in women's health so we create more drugs. Another piece of it is getting more women into state legislatures and on Capitol Hill in the United States. Another piece of it is giving to 12 global leaders who each got $20 million to further their causes and to find others that are following some of the causes that they're promoting. One of them, for instance, is doing education in Afghanistan. Another one is Richard Reeves, who's trying to lift up boys and men so that they understand, they have good roles in society.
And do you have anyone in the Trump administration, somebody high up now, that you could pick up the phone to and just say, look, I'd like to work with you on X, Y, or Z?
Not at the moment, but I certainly have contacts on Capitol Hill in both the Senate and the House. And to me, that's where you build bipartisan legislation. And I care a lot, for instance, and one of the things I'm trying to further is legislation around caregiving, because too many people in society are dealing with aging parents and young kids. And we have a broken caregiving system in the United States, and it's holding, in particular, women back.
Thank you very much for talking to me. It really, it's very helpful. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.